Hello, fam. These are the solutions for your Unit 6 review, the multiple choice problems. Before we get into them, there's just a few things that I need to cover. So number one, make sure that you do this review before you watch these videos. We talk about lots how that you'll get the most out of this if you actually try the problems first and then come through and check your solutions. So, the intent of this video is for you to check your solutions and get the help that you need on the ones that you miss. So to help facilitate that, I will put a card up for each number that we're going through. I'll keep it there for like 5 seconds so that you can just scroll to the next one if there is a problem that you do not need to watch the solutions for. So feel free to fast forward. Open this video up in YouTube if you need to so that you can do that. Just click on the link at the top of the little gray bar and that'll kick you out to the YouTube site. And then you can go down to your track bar and just drag it along to the next question looking for this number if you don't need to watch the solutions for that particular problem. Then the last thing is what you see on my paper is what I would have done if I were a student. So I did these as if I were you, so I've included a lot of work and a lot of things that I would need to write down to help me move through these problems. So if you're not writing anything on your multiple choice problems, you're probably not doing them the best that they can be done. You're not giving yourself a really great chance to be successful if you're not writing anything down. I did have one last thing to tell you. What was it? It jumped out of my brain space. Oh, as we go through this, I will refer to this overview where applicable. So if there are things that I need to complete this multiple choice portion that aren't on this overview, you should add them in. And I'll add them in as I go if I find any. So you should smush them in somewhere by where they go on your overview, or you can leave this space here that I left blank. I left this space here for you guys so that you could add in the specific things that you need to remember in order to be successful on this test. And then lastly, lots of you guys have asked me how you are supposed to study for your exams. So the best advice that I can give you is memorize every single thing on this overview. Everything that's on here, you want to be able to recall without having this paper in front of you. That's part of why we make this, is so one, you know all of the things that you're going to need to remember or memorize, and two, for me personally, I learn things by writing them down, so I think that it's helpful for you to gather all the information in one place and have to write it down. That's why I think this section, the section that's blank, could potentially be the most helpful section on the entire overview for you. So make sure that all of the information on here you have memorized, and then make sure that you could do every single one of these problems without your note sheet, without any help. The problems that you see on your exam are going to be similar to, if not exactly the same as what you see in this review. So if you can't do this review without your notes, how are you going to do the test without your notes? If you would like me to give you a blank copy so that you can go through the problems again and not know what the answers are so you can see if you can actually do them without your notes, I'm happy to do that. And they're also uploaded in our modules. So if you just wanted to pull up a blank one and go through the questions and write your answers down on a piece of paper, that would also be helpful. So just to recap that, if it were me, I would memorize everything on this overview, and I would gather on this overview every single thing that I thought I needed to know for this test. Like, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, if I could use this on my test, What's every single little thing that I would want to have on here? And then I smash it all on. So think of it that way. If you could use this on your test, what would you need or what would you want? And then secondly, I would do this review twice. I would do it once with my notes and going through the solutions and getting the help that I need. Then I would try to memorize my overview and take it one more time. I know that that sounds like a lot of work to do for one class, but one thing you guys should keep in mind is that I know that it's a lot of work, and that's why when you're in college, you typically only take 3 or 4 classes. At the max, 5 classes, because this is a lot of work to spend on one class. So if you're taking 5 or 6 AP classes, I can see how this probably feels like I don't have enough time to be spending that much time on my review. But really, in college, the expectation is you're only taking 3 or 4, so it doesn't seem unreasonable that you would spend hours studying for a unit exam. So, that all being said, we'll get into the actual problems now. And I will put the index card down for every problem. I have to tell myself that so I don't forget. Okay, let's do this. Numero uno is delta. So this problem specifically says, have the conditions for inference been met for a 1 sample z interval? And I have a portion on my overview that specifically applies to that. So 1 sample z interval, what conditions do I need to check? These are the 3 things that I need to check. So you can see my, my reasoning written around the problem. I checked randomness, I checked sample size, and I checked 10% condition. Hang on, pause. I need to double check something. Okay, it's a good thing that we're going through this review because as I looked up the things that I'm supposed to check for this problem, I realized that I checked the wrong thing here, and hopefully you guys noticed that as well. So this is asking me specifically about a z interval, and we only use z intervals for a proportion. So I have the wrong check here. If I have a proportion, I should be checking this, and not that the sample size is greater than 30. So I'm going to erase that, and I'm going to do the appropriate work. So I'm going to pause my video, and it'll seem like just like in 1 second, I'll be back with the right answers. Okay, I corrected my large counts, and it is still met. So checking the wrong condition, large counts was satisfied, but now checking the right one, it's still satisfied. So the only one that is violated is the 10% condition. The biggest sample that I can take for a population of 200 is 20, and I have taken 30. One other thing that might be helpful to mention on this is that I know that 200 is the population number because of the information that they give me down here. So, well, and actually right next to my population number. It's telling us that the council president wanted to estimate the percent of its members that have experience writing grants, but then starts by telling you how many members the council has. So of the 200 members, he samples 30. K2 is asking for the point estimate for the population. So on my overview, the one section that I have, oh, do you see what I did there? I didn't hold up my index card. Rewind. Okay, so for point estimate, I have written here that it is the p hat or the x bar that we have calculated from the sample data. So from the sample data, they calculated that the average body weight of the bears was 203. So my point estimate was an x bar. How did I know that I was dealing with x bar? because they're telling me they're using the word average and they're using the word mean. Number 3. So I've tried to give you lots of problems that ask you to interpret a confidence interval because it seems like no two interpretations are the same. We have a very specific interpretation that we use when we're doing free response, but then on the multiple choice, it just seems like they're trying to word it in a way that will trick us, and it's not what they expect us to write on the free response. So because of that, I've tried to give you lots of these to give you enough practice that you can be successful. So I just went in order. I knew that A was not right because they were saying that we're confident that the proportion from the sample is between 42 and 52, but we know the sample. And that's not the purpose of a confidence interval in the first place. We're estimating the population proportion. So B is the same exact thing, except for they correct that statement and say that we're confident that the true population proportion is between 42 and 52. So I immediately circled that one after I read it, and then I came down to check if I thought these were correct. Now, when you are under a time constraint, you may not have the time to go through and check C, D, E. So if that's the case, it may do you more good to circle B and make a star so that you can come back to it if you have extra time and verify that C, D, and E are wrong. So this C is true, but it has nothing to do with the confidence interval. D is also, they're asking specifically, so C, D, and E, they're asking specifically to interpret the confidence interval, and these are not addressing the confidence interval at all. A and B are the only two that even mention what the confidence interval is, which is 42% to 52%. Okay, next up. Okay, number 4. So this is one of those ones where you have to evaluate whether or not the percent that they're interested in is actually in our interval. So we have a confidence interval that goes from 46% to 52%. And we have to determine which of these claims is supported or true. So the first two are saying more than 90% and more than 60%. Well, those can't be right because the largest value in our confidence interval is 52%. So these definitely are not true. C, more than 40% support the increase. Yes, that's true. All values in the interval are greater than 40%. So if you're under a time crunch, I would recommend that you select C, start and move on if you don't feel confident, and then come back. And if not, you can check D and E just to make sure that you truly have the right one. So D says fewer than 10% support. Well, no, our lowest value is 46%. So that one's not true. And fewer than 25% support, nope. Once again, our lowest value is 46. So this is the only one that is true. It's the only one that we can say, yes, all of our values were more than 40%. Okay, 5. So once again, this is interpreting an interval. Letter A had a similar problem with it that the last one did. So we are confident that any sample of this same size will produce a sample proportion between these two values. We will have samples that are outside of that. We're only 95% confident that our value, our true value, is in here. So what that means is in my mind, what I think about is there's a 5% chance that we get a sample value outside of these numbers. So not all of the values will be between here. And the other issue with this is that this isn't, when we interpret a confidence interval, we're interpreting it in terms of our estimate for the population value. So if the sample is in your interpretation, that's usually wrong. We're trying to estimate the population value, so we should not be talking about the sample value in our interpretation. So B is that we're 95% confident that the proportion of all people, so the proportion of all people is referring to the population. And that's what we want. Then C, we're talking about the sample again. D and E, we don't interpret a confidence interval as a probability. We use probability language, but we don't interpret it with the phrasing, the probability is 95%. So D and E, I would eliminate just because that's not the appropriate way to interpret. On part A, I actually think that this statement is true. After I was talking out loud about why it wouldn't be true, I think that this might be true. And the issue is that when we interpret a confidence interval, we are not interpreting it in terms of our sample. We're interpreting it in terms of our population. So I would eliminate A and C because they're talking about the sample, D and E because they're interpreting in terms of probability, which we don't do. Okay, 6 is asking specifically about whether or not a proportion, so they're telling us that we're working with a proportion, is approximately normal. So I had to go back to my notes for this one to remind myself for a proportion, what do I check to ensure that my sampling distribution is normal? And that is large counts. So I need to check large counts to verify that my sampling distribution is normal. So that is not on here. So maybe you want to add in here, large counts is talking about whether the sampling distribution is normal, or maybe you want to add it in here into the space that I left you. So I'm going to grab a pencil really quick and add that into mine. So I just smashed it in right next to the condition. So right here I check my large counts, and large counts is not met, so the answer has to be B. Okay, so I had to write some information down about this one. So the first thing that I wrote down was the sample size of R compared to S, and I realized that it was 4 times bigger. And then I remembered in our notes that there was one section or one problem where we went through and talked about how will my margin of error change if I increase my sample size by a certain factor. So this is actually exactly what we're doing on this problem. Our sample is 4 times as big. So that means my margin of error will be adjusted by a factor of 1 over root 4. So it's similar to this problem. Well, to figure out how I would say that in terms of the margin of error for S compared to the margin of error for R, I actually wrote down the algebra steps. So if S is 4 times bigger, that means that the margin of error of S is going to be 1 times root 4, 1 over root 4 times the margin of error of R. So using algebra, I simplified it to this. 1 over root 4 is 1 over 2. And then multiplying both sides by 2, I get this. So what this is telling me is that the margin of error of S is 2 times bigger than the margin of error for R. So I went through and figured out how many times bigger and used this idea to answer the question. I had to go through and verify each of them because of the way that they worded it. This is not on your overview, so you may want to add this to the bottom part. Whether or not it's on the overview is not necessarily an indication of whether or not you will see it on your actual exam. That's why I'm saying you should add what you think that you might need to answer the questions on the actual exam. So if this is something that you're pretty sure you wouldn't remember, I would add in what information you would want to have in front of you if you could use this on the test or on a question like this. Okay, which of the following correctly compares the t distribution and the z distribution? So that goes back to this section on our overview. So the t distribution is more spread out than the z distribution for small sample sizes. Remember, as your sample size gets bigger, your t distribution gets closer to the purple curve. But if you have small sample sizes, it's more like the orange curve. And in that case, the orange curve is more spread out than the purple curve. If you need to add that in somewhere, make sure that you do. Like, you could add right here, as n gets bigger, the orange curve becomes closer to the purple curve. That's why on our pink t table, we use a sample size or a degrees of freedom of infinity for our z critical value, because when your sample size is large, essentially your t distribution looks like a standard normal distribution. Question 9 is one question that the AP board, the kind of question that the AP board loves to ask on exams. And the reason for that is you need more than one chapter to answer this question. You need some background knowledge about how these tables work and how to calculate your proportion in order to answer the question about confidence intervals. So they're getting 2 for the price of 1. They're checking whether you know 2 separate chapters with one question. So this one wants to know what would the 95% confidence interval be for the true proportion that are very supportive or somewhat supportive. To calculate this, you need to gather the number of respondents that were in those categories. So somewhat supportive is 387. Not supportive is, or very supportive is 336. Thank you, dear. You can leave it at the door and I'll bring it back if you want. Okay, sorry about that. So I think that I said that wrong, so let me just make sure that I say it right. We want to gather these two numbers. So the very supportive, I have it written underneath, was 336, and the somewhat supportive was 387. So we want to combine those for a total of 723. 723 out of 1,018 would give us a p-hat of 0.71. So here I am calculating my standard error, which is 0.014. Well, first of all, I should address that means A and B are wrong. So then I need to calculate my margin of error. I'm hoping that as I go through, you guys are catching all my mistakes, because now that I'm looking at it again, I'm catching mine. This should not be a T critical, it's a Z critical, because we're dealing with a proportion. So to get my margin of error, I multiply my critical value times my standard error of P. I did that one right. And our answer would be E. Okay, so this one I needed a little bit extra space. They want, the reported percent has a margin of error of 2.7 percentage points, which is closest to the level of confidence. So we have this on our overview here. So I changed my margin of error to a percent, 0.027. To get that, you could divide 2.7 by 100. This is my formula for margin of error. This is me solving that equation. So I got 90% confidence. Okay, so now that we're 30 minutes into this video, I'm going to break these videos up so that they're a little bit quicker for me to upload. So we've gone through the first 10 problems. I'm going to end this video here, and then I will make another video. Hopefully I can get through the rest of the questions, but we'll see.